Thank you all for being here, and it's really great that we have such a terrific turnout. Again, grab some food if you've not already done so, and we'll get the program started. But first, before the formal program begins, I'm really pleased to welcome and introduce a friend, John Lee. John Lee is the IP counsel for the House Judiciary Committee and has done yeoman's work on these issues for some time. And John was gracious enough to not only help us secure this room, but also to take a few moments from his busy day to come say hello. And I want to thank him and, of course, Chairman Issa for securing the room for today's briefing. So, John?
Thanks, Frank. Just want to very briefly welcome everybody on behalf of Chairman Jordan as well as Chairman Issa. Both Chairman Jordan and Chairman Issa recognize the very important role that this issue is going to play going forward. It's really important that policymakers here get all of the best advice and information about this very important issue, and so we're thrilled that C4IP is holding this event, and we're very, very happy to help organize it. So with that, welcome to everybody, and hand it back to Frank.
Thanks, John. As you heard, my name is Frank. I'm Frank Cullen. I'm the Executive Director for the Council for Innovation Promotion. Again, we're very thrilled to have so many folks here to talk about a very important issue, something that's concerning to not only the IP-intensive industries, but to our entire economy and to innovation writ large, where we lead and have been so successful in terms of American competitiveness. I can tell you it's really an honor to be here co-hosting this event with the Bayh-Dole Coalition. In a moment, I'll introduce my friend Joe Allen, who has been working on these issues literally for decades. And sorry, I don't want to make Joe feel bad by referencing the fact he's been in the trenches on this for so long, but no one has a more comprehensive knowledge of the Bayh-Dole Act than Joe. And we want to thank the Bayh-Dole Coalition and also Joe Allen for their leadership on these issues and the opportunity to partner for this important event. For those of you who don't know, the Council for Innovation Promotion is a nonprofit formed about a year and a half ago by Dave Kapos and Andre Iancu, two former PTO directors from different administrations. We're a bipartisan group, and our aim is to try to encourage support and continued and increased understanding of the important role intellectual property plays in driving our innovation ecosystem and our creative output, which of course create millions, over 55 million American jobs, almost 40% of our GDP, and well over half of our trade. These are huge numbers. It's a huge consequence, not only economically, but also in terms of impacting and improving the quality of everyone's life. So with that, I'm going to step aside and turn it over to my friend Joe. I want to again thank you all for being here. We hope you'll pay attention to this very serious issue. Joe is going to share some insights. He's going to speak for about 5 or 7 minutes, and then we're going to turn it over to a panel. So we know your time is precious. We're going to try to stay on time and be concise so that you can get the benefit of all the expertise on this panel. And Joe, again, thanks so much for doing this. It's my honor to welcome you.
So first of all, I very much appreciate the great work that Frank and his staff have done on putting this together. As he also alluded, I'm old. I've been doing this. I had brown hair when I started this. So if you get into this issue, you could wind up looking like me. So you've been well warned. The other thing is these table mics are set up exactly at the angle of going right in your eye. So one of my goals today is not only to go through the briefing, but come out of this without losing an eye, and hopefully the rest of the panel will too. But I think since we're on Capitol Hill, they're immune from being sued for being blinded by a microphone. This is a serious issue. And I want to give you a quick overview about what is the Bayh-Dole Act, which a lot of you probably never heard of before, and why are we here today? Basically, before 1980, if the government funded any research, it was taken away from anybody that invented it, taken to Washington, and made freely available to anybody that wanted to use it, which sounds like a very laudable idea. The problem was the government's not funding products. It's funding early-stage research or mission-related research, but those are not products. So what we found was in an election year, I worked for Birch Bayh, we found that billions and billions of dollars of technologies, literally tens of thousands, were gathering dust in Washington, not benefiting anybody. And Senator Bayh and Senator Dole, who were on opposite sides of the aisle, didn't agree on very much, said, this doesn't make any sense. At the time where we're losing a competitive edge to Japan and Germany, how can we be having the taxpayer spend billions of dollars in research and it just sits on the shelf? So what the Bayh-Dole Act did was it actually changed that. It says if a university or a small company makes an invention with government funding, they can own it. They can then either license it as a university or commercialize it as a small company. The government can use it for free. Universities need to make sure they spend royalties in funding more research or rewarding inventors. But we decentralized technology management out of Washington into the hands of the people doing it. The other thing was when we drafted the Bayh-Dole Act, universities hadn't managed technologies before because they didn't own them. So we put a fail-safe into the Bayh-Dole system, and it's called march-in rights. And march-in rights is like the airbag on your car. It's if a catastrophe happens, they deploy, but basically you hope to never use them. One of the keys of march-in rights was we said, okay, if a big company licenses a university technology for the purpose of suppressing it, suppose it actually makes obsolete an existing product. Bayh-Dole wants to make sure things are being developed and brought to the market. So we said if a company licenses the technology for the purpose of suppressing it, or if a university puts unreasonable terms in the license agreement. For example, you have to hire the chancellor's daughter as a CEO or build us a new football stadium or whatever. In those rare cases, the government can then step in, march in, and force the university to license other people. So that's how the law worked for 20 years. No one questioned it. And Bayh-Dole became one of the things driving the U.S. economy. Literally 20 years after the law passed, there were people that didn't like Bayh-Dole. They had a couple of law professors that wrote an alternative legislative history to Bayh-Dole. And they claimed that the government could march in if somebody didn't like the price of a product. And Senator Bayh-Dole immediately wrote back, said, no, it's not how the law worked. NIH had a meeting on it, and Senator Bayh specifically showed how the legislation didn't sanction that. But nevertheless, a series of march-in petitions were filed asking the government, particularly NIH, to march in because people didn't like the price of a product, particularly drugs. Every one of those petitions for 20 years has been rejected by Republican and Democratic administrations, including the Biden administration at last March. One of the strongest denials came from the Biden administration. By the way, Senator Joe Biden voted for Bayh-Dole and voted against putting reasonable pricing in the law. So as of March of last year, everyone agreed that pricing was not a factor for marching in. But then suddenly in December 7th, which those of us who know history call it, I think it was Pearl Harbor Day, we bombed ourselves. Suddenly the Biden administration, for no particular reason, said now pricing is in fact a march-in criteria. So in essence, what you've done is you've turned the whole law upside down after 43 years. Congress didn't sanction that. They didn't change the law. But now suddenly, the bureaucracy is saying, we're turning the whole law upside down. So we're going to talk about the impact of that, but this is a big deal. And it doesn't just affect universities. It affects small companies because the SBIR program is based on Bayh-Dole. The CHIPS Act is based on Bayh-Dole. Any federal funding, agriculture, energy, interior, based on Bayh-Dole. And now you put a target on the back of anybody who takes federal funding. So I'd like to stop by saying the Economist Technology Quarterly called Bayh-Dole perhaps the most inspired law passed in the last 50 years. Quote, more than anything, it's helped reverse America's precipitous slide into industrial irrelevance. We start 3 new companies and have 3 new technologies commercialized every day of the year under Bayh-Dole. China has adopted Bayh-Dole as a best practice. We cannot afford to unilaterally disarm now and turn Bayh-Dole upside down. So again, we appreciate your time, but this is a very, very serious issue. And the other irony is this was done under the guise of controlling drug prices. The place that's going to have the least impact is on drug pricing because most drugs are protected by a series of patents. Maybe one came from Bayh-Dole, so you can't copy them just for march-in rights. But what you can do is you can, in fact, target small startup companies because their technologies are likely to be under Bayh-Dole. So now they have a target on their backs. So we're going to talk about the impact there. What we'd like to do is our friend Andre Yanko is going to be moderating the panel. He's a senior partner at Sullivan Cromwell and also was the patent director. So he knows something about this, not just from a theoretical standpoint, but he's actually been in the trenches. So Andre, I'd like to have you introduce our panel, and after the panel discussion, we'll be happy to take some questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Joe. Nobody knows more about this issue than Joe Allen. He's been living and breathing it for a long time, and now especially as the head of the Bayh-Dole Coalition. spends, I would say, every minute of his waking and sleeping hours thinking and communicating about this issue to great effect. Thank you for everything you do, Joe, on this issue. Let me start by thanking the House and the members of the House Judiciary Committee in particular, and the IP Subcommittee, Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Nadler, Chairman Issa, and Ranking Member Johnson, for allowing us to host this, and John Lee in particular, who you heard from a few minutes ago, for helping us organize this event here. And so good to see so many friends here in the audience. This is fantastic. Great group, and I look forward to this fabulous conversation. Let me introduce the panel, but please note that in about 20 minutes or so, we're going to open it up to audience questions, and we're going to definitely want to hear from you and engage in a conversation. So if you haven't done it yet, please get your questions ready. So let me just start introducing folks from my right down the row. First, we have Kate Hudson, who is the Associate Vice President and Counsel for Government Relations and Public Policy at AAU, the American Association of Universities. She has a long history in the legal system. Before then, she worked in government for many different agencies, including GAO and GSA and OPM and lots of other three-letter acronyms, although I see here some four letters as well, but we'll skip those. And she was also a public defender in North Carolina. Great career, and thank you for being here, Kate. Next to her, we have Charles Crane, who is the Vice President of Domestic Policy for the National Association of Manufacturers, also known as NAM. He's been here for several years, and before then, he was with the BIO organization. And then on my left, we have Dave Kapos, who is currently a partner at Cravath, Swain and Moore in New York. Prior to that, he was the director of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office during the Obama administration. And over the past couple of years, we've worked closely together to establish the Council for Innovation Promotion. And as you've heard from Frank, it's a bipartisan organization. And I'm very proud to work with them side by side on these issues in a bipartisan manner. All these issues, and in particular this issue, really is of bipartisan concern. When it comes to IP, the issues do not break down along party lines, and we really work very hard to keep it that way. And this allows us to have a really deep, in-depth, substantive discussion. So to that end, let me actually start with Dave. And Dave, to get us going, maybe you can talk a little bit about the history of how government agencies have looked at Bayh-Dole and Marchin in particular, how they would handle it, and then how that would change under the new proposed framework.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Andre, and great to see everyone and to be here with you this afternoon. So let's just turn to it. There have been, over the years and generations, occasional, not like monthly, but every administration has had some requests come in some way, manner, or form relative to marching in under the Bayh-Dole Act, right? As Joe mentioned, this legislation goes back over 40 years now. And so R&D administrations have faced this, and petitions coming in from various quarters and sides. And the way they've always been weighed up until now, first of all, as has been mentioned already, price has usually not been something that that agencies would weigh, but for the short period that Joe mentioned before. But really what the agencies did weigh is whether there was an imminent risk of a Bayh-Dole affected product, or a product that had an upstream patent that was funded by the federal government, whether there was a imminent risk of that product not being available because of a force majeure situation, like the manufacturer's plant burned down, something like that, or not available for any other reason, supply chain reasons or whatever. Now, up until now, every single time that question has been asked, after careful consideration, and probably everybody in this room knows that if government agencies are good at anything, they're good at sober, careful consideration and process. The determination was always made that there is no imminent risk here, no reason for the government to march in. And so march in has been consistently 100.0% of the time under both R&D administrations, declined every single time it's been requested up until now.
And Dave, let me just ask a follow-up question. Looking at the various scenarios, so the proposal has 8 scenarios, examples at the back, with how agencies might analyze particular circumstances. Looking at that, if you're a government agency faced with a request like this and you have to follow those scenarios, how would that look and how would it be different from the way it's been?
Yeah. So I think this is going to be not just a significant undertaking, but quite frankly, an impossible undertaking for government agencies. If I were, back running the USPTO again, I'd be thinking, look, so we're going to have to put staff on weighing economic considerations in the marketplace, pricing of products. That is extremely judgment-based. It's extremely context-based. We're going to have to provide some due process. So we're going to have to permit, not only those who are filing petitions to come in with their evidence, but we're going to have to permit those who are answering the petitions, the patent holders, to respond. And we're going to be put in the position of having government employees judging appropriate pricing and other criterion, because we're moving away from the exigency criterion, as Joe mentioned, the sort of airbag metaphor. We're moving away from that to a very judgment-based balancing test. I frankly don't see how the government's going to be able to do that, particularly, right? So pricing, again, is the most sensitive thing that happens in companies. They're weighing many, many factors that go into setting price. Whole departments are doing that based on all the information that companies have available to them. It's going to be very easy for any big manufacturer to come in and suggest to the federal government, of course, I'm a big company. I can manufacture this product less expensively. I've got bigger factories. I've got more access to labor. I've got raw material deals that I can use to get great prices. I didn't have to invest anything in the R&D. Isn't that a great component of being able to come in and say, I can do this work less expensively? So you're going to have extremely well-armed companies coming in, making, of course, many of these petitions, because anytime there's a price arbitrage, there's going to be an incentive to come in. And you're going to have government agencies like the USPTO, as great an agency as it is, and literally potentially 100 others having to set up infrastructure to deal with this. I just don't at all get how this is going to work and come out with decisions that are going to be appropriate for our country.
Thanks, Dave. Really important to emphasize that the scenarios at the back are not at all limited to drugs or drug pricing. In fact, the NIST proposal says that it applies to all industries. Scenario 5 is about water filtration. Scenario 7 is about highway safety and vehicle-to-everything communications. And price is added as a consideration for the first time across the various scenarios, but so are other criteria, that the scenarios at the back contemplate, such as really the safety of our highways, which everybody agrees is important, but but it's a question as to how are you going to have a judgment call as to whether the government should march in to increase such things as, quote, highway safety. Anyway, with that in mind, let me turn now to a view from the university side. And Kate, if I can ask you, first of all, why is it that the universities care about this? How, and then how does Bayh-Dole, how does Bayh-Dole so far work with the universities? How do you take advantage of it, of the statute, and how would this proposed framework change all that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Joe and Frank, for the opportunity to share our perspective on the impact of this new framework. At the Association of American Universities, I represent 69 U.S. and 2 Canadian top-level R1 research universities, but this is not only applicable to them. This is going to be applicable to all universities, from all your public flagship universities all the way down to your small private universities that, like Carnegie Mellon and others, that are really getting into some really cutting-edge tech, like in AI. So this is applying throughout higher education where technology transfer takes place. So not just my universities. To answer your question, the impact on universities, this is quite a breathtaking pivot in policy change. This is really, Bayh-Dole is something that, because of people like Joe Allen and others, has been running kind of in the background in our innovation economy. And we don't, with a few exceptions, we don't remember what it was like before. I'm going to pull Joe's leg a little bit and tell him that I was 6 months old when this law was passed. But it has been so effective in working in the background in the innovation economy that we don't realize how impactful it will be. And how, do I need to push this on? Sorry. How do you push it? Sorry, can you hear me now?
Teamwork.
Can you hear me now? Okay. So Bayh-Dole has been working in the background in our innovation ecosystem to the point where we take it really for granted how our pieces fit together. Research universities that receive federal funding are doing, as Dave was talking about, as Andre was talking about, the nascent, early stage, embryonic research that brings you eventually, hopefully, to market through commercialization. Universities would be hugely impacted by this. As it is now, we license our technology to startups, small and medium-sized firms. Venture capital is really interested in those developments at those small and medium-sized firms and startups to bring these research advancements from their early stage all the way through, hopefully, to commercialization. Bayh-Dole makes that happen. But if we change a very pivotal part of this, the reasonable pricing and other components of this framework are being changed. But the reasonable pricing one is what we are focusing on primarily, is that this fundamentally changes that dynamic between licensees and those individuals who are willing to take on the risk and put in the research and development funds to bring that nascent technology to fruition through commercialization. It fundamentally changes that dynamic because it's already a very risk-intensive environment. And university tech transfer offices are working every day to license technologies. This would dry things up. I mean, I will tell you in no uncertain terms, who is going to be able to take this on as an additional layer of risk if reasonable pricing is on the table in terms of having a march-in petition filed. Also, my universities would be, and all universities would be affected in that if a petition is filed, the university is an obligatory, participant in that inquiry. We can't just let our licensee or the people that are filing the petition do this out with the agency. So universities would be drawn into this, taking precious resources, time, staff, paying outside counsel enormous amounts of money, and really delaying the process of bringing these research advancements to market. And so the impact on universities at a time right now when so much is dependent on the future of our workforce planning, all of the wonderful programming coming out of the new NSF TIP directorate, Chips and Science, among others, Cancer Moonshot. All of this will be affected by changes to the dynamics of Bayh-Dole. It cuts directly across it. And quite frankly, technology transfer will likely dry up. And we will just not see things come to market. They will just not be developed. They will continue to sit on a research lab shelf. We just won't get the innovation anymore. It will just stop. And so that's why the universities are very interested in this and really want to get the message out that this is a really bad framework.
Hey, Kate, let me just add one thing to say, as if everything that you've just explained isn't bad enough. I believe universities are going to be differentially much more hardly hit, much more hard hit by this change to Bayh-Dole for the following reason. In most industries, the universities are performing what's called the head-end research, the basic research, and they're the ones who are taking small amounts of government funding, a few $100,000, maybe a few $1 million. That seems like a lot, but when you talk about $1 billion or $2 or $3 billion that it takes to bring most products to market these days, and really all products in the biopharma field, what you find is that the universities are doing the head-end work. They're using some government funding, right? Then they're licensing that work, the patents that result from it, down to large companies that have the scope and scale to make the products and services that stem from the basic research. As Joe Allen said earlier, that follow-on R&D is usually not dependent on government funding, so it's not subject to the Bayh-Dole Act. So what's going to happen now after this provision goes into effect is that the licensees of the head-end research and development, the R&D companies, are going to be willing to pay much less for the head-end work and access to those patents, because those patents are going to be worth next to nothing to them. They're going to be only good for unblocking purposes to make sure they're not getting sued by the universities. They're not going to be good for exclusivity downstream once products and services are ready. So the bottom line here is the universities are absolutely the ones who are going to take the brunt of this. The exact parties that we don't want to be affected because they reinvest the funds they get in R&D, forget about it. Those funds are going to be gone. Reinvestment in R&D, gone.
Is another, to Kate and Dave, is another possible outcome of this that universities or some research labs will simply not take federal funds? So Congress just passed, President Biden signed the Chips and Science Act, distributing billions of dollars for research in the semiconductor industry. Might a choice be made by some of your professors, for example, not to take those funds and avoid this issue altogether?
I mean, potentially, yes. It definitely gives one pause to think that federal research dollars will essentially be tainted for those programs. The uncertainty and doubt introduced specifically by this framework just creates such a cloud that professors are like, you know what, I don't want to start a startup. I don't want to get into that. It's too much of an entanglement. It's going to be, and I could do all of this work for nothing. So yes, that is definitely a possibility.
The people it's hard to imagine universities turning down federal funding. They could. People that will turn it down are the entrepreneurs, the small companies. Because now, if you try to raise venture funding, this will be used against you. And even if they file a margin petition that's not successful, no VC is going to fund you with this hanging over your head. So it's small companies that drive innovation. 70% of university licenses go to small companies. In every field, even in life sciences, it's small companies that take the risk that then prove themselves out, and then the big companies typically follow later. So the people are going to stay away. Bayh-Dole affects universities and small businesses. The SBIR program falls under this. So any small company that takes federal funding, you really wouldn't think twice about. You're probably going to get research companies taking it, not companies that are looking to make a commercial product.
So this is a great segue. Let me now turn over to Charles Crane from NAM. Charles, your organization has some 14,000 members. The vast majority are small businesses. And while universities and research labs do the research, the head-end research, and they innovate, a lot of your members license those technologies. How would this impact your vast membership?
Absolutely. Thanks, Andre. And I think Joe really laid it out really well. Just to take a step back, so the NAM represents, as Andre said, about 14,000 manufacturers in all sectors of the economy. Manufacturing is a really broad term, and so we have representation across all different segments of the American economy, and specifically the American innovation economy, which we're, of course, talking about today. You know, our companies license intellectual property from Kate's folks, from the universities, and they develop it in-house on their own. And it's a pretty decent likelihood that some piece of that was developed with federal funding. We've mentioned a couple of the programs today, right? NIH funding, SBIR, especially for that early stage head-end research. There's a pretty decent likelihood that federal money, Bayh-Dole money, was involved in that early stage research process. But it's the companies that are the ones that actually have to invest the subsequent millions to billions of dollars to actually commercialize that product. That's not to understate the importance of that early stage research. Nobody is saying that like, oh, SBIR didn't do enough for us, but SBIR is a couple $100,000, right? Commercializing a product is hundreds of millions to $1 billion, right? And so if we don't allow the companies to have the intellectual property that they've developed over the course of that hundreds of millions to billions of dollars of investment, you really disincentivize a small startup and entrepreneur from taking that step in the first place. You know, if you think about what these small businesses look like, these entrepreneurs, they're often founded around just one idea. It's a single professor who's coming out with a single idea, a single patent. So there's not, you know, this sort of broad, diversified stream of things that are and aren't Bayh-Dole implicated, that are and aren't federally funded. It's just one thing. And if that one thing is federally funded, then they're sucked into this conversation that we're all having. And those companies are really the heart of the innovation economy in America. And so if you don't allow them to have their intellectual property rights and you have the risk of the government marching in, it really disincentivizes that type of early stage company formation. It also disincentivizes the early stage capital formation. So Joe just mentioned this. Venture capitalists are often the ones who help those startup companies get off the ground because that's where the money comes from, right? The scientist has the idea, no money. The venture capitalists had the money, but no idea. No offense to the venture capitalists. And so you put those two together and you've got a real compelling idea. Many startups fail. Most startups fail. But if we start disincentivizing startups from even getting into the game in the first place, either because the entrepreneur doesn't want to play ball or because the VCs won't invest money in the project, then you don't have the innovation economy writ large. And so I think there's a real threat here to a broad swath of products and developments and technologies that don't even exist yet, right? Certainly the sort of healthcare biopharma space has been the headline for this conversation, but it's, yes, healthcare, but also AI, it's chips and semiconductors, it's cybersecurity, it's clean energy, it's advanced batteries. I mean, really everything that we're thinking about being on the cutting edge of the 21st century innovation economy is potentially at risk here. And the way that the process will play out if this is finalized, the ability to file these petitions, it creates these perverse incentive structures where folks can file for anything, right? We like to think that people are kind of high-minded and, well, we would only really file a petition if there's this sort of airbag need that folks have used, but there's no limits on who can file these things. It's not only if NIST or Commerce or whoever looks and says, oh, this is a real airbag situation, we need to step in. Anybody can file these petitions. And so you create a real perverse incentive structure for sort of untoward actors forcing government action here. Even if the petition is ultimately denied, you're still creating these downstream disincentives on the entrepreneurs and the venture capitalists who are supposed to be funding and starting this innovation ecosystem. So it's a real threat on the corporate side as well, in addition to the universities that Kate talked about.
You know, if I can just add one point to Charles, to put a real world sort of a not hypothetical but actual exclamation point. I've so far gotten calls from two companies. In one case, senior executive of a growth phase biopharma company. In the other case, a senior executive of a private equity funding company. So both the kinds of companies that you are talking about, and they're asking, should we continue to get involved in innovation that's funded by the federal government with this Bayh-Dole thing. There were, kind of coming along. In both cases, the only good advice to give them is you need to be very wary now about funding a venture that's dependent on a federal government funded patent, or about taking money from the federal government. And I would expect that every other advisor out there is giving the same advice already. So this is not at all hypothetical. It's happening already, and you're absolutely going to see companies on the funding side and on the innovation side moving away from federal funding.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And a lot of y'all in this room work really hard on these programs, right? The CHIPS and Science Act was a huge focus for the administration and for Capitol Hill. And if no one will take those dollars, then that sort of defeats the purpose of doing all the great work that you're all doing to get funding into these specific sectors that the president and congressional leadership really want to see invested in. Chips and semiconductors, critical to the innovation economy currently. But if folks are hearing from folks like Dave correctly that this is really tainted money potentially, you shouldn't be taking those dollars, then not only does that hurt the companies and the universities, it also kind of undercuts all the great programs and all the great work that y'all are all doing here as well. It has a lot of kind of spider webbed out of implications beyond just one individual company who might or might not take federal money.
Now, Charles, the reality is that in the United States, research and development funding comes only in part from the U.S. government, right? So there are a lot of other sources of funding research and development, private funds, and the like. So, can you talk a little bit as to how the market dynamic would change for the federal funds? Where would they go? What would happen to that research and development? Would private industry step up if companies or universities don't take the funds that the federal government puts out? Where's the funding going to come from? Or maybe they're just going to forego that innovation altogether. What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, there's a real risk here. I think sort of at the starting point that folks just won't take the money at all, right? They're going to worry about it being tainted and not be able to commercialize, right? As we've talked about, companies are the ones who have to do the subsequent tens of hundreds of millions of dollars of investment to actually commercialize something. So if your first $200,000 to $400,000 are tainted, you're probably just going to forego those dollars entirely. I think to the extent that folks do take those dollars, is a real risk, and both Kate and Joe mentioned this, of that research just sitting on a shelf somewhere. If the federal government is going to give out dollars to really brilliant scientists to investigate a potential, maybe something about a molecule that may or may not pan out, that's the type of speculative, we'll say, research that we really want the government to be funding, because there might not be an obvious commercial outcome, right? Because the government's going to fund 100 of those projects, and 99.5 of them are going to turn into nothing because it's early stage and interesting, and maybe this molecule, and what are we going to do? We want the government to be doling out those $100,000 grants with the expectation that a lot of them fail, because the one that succeeds is going to get licensed, become commercialized, and so become a groundbreaking technology, right? But if they aren't doing those, then you really run the risk of that 1 out of 100 never getting the chance to get off the ground. And so it really undercuts the broader ecosystem rather than just one individual instance.
Okay, we're going to go to audience questions in just a couple of minutes. I was going to urge people to get ready, but I already see folks are ready. Let me just ask one more quick question, Charles, because it's fascinating what you just said. The whole premise, if you read the NIST proposed framework, the whole premise is to, in some circumstances, to help bring those technologies to the market more, to provide more market access to the technologies. If for some reason the patent owner, is not doing it, doesn't have capacity or price is too high, whatever it is. Yet what you're saying is, and Kate as well, is that it's actually going to have the exact opposite effect, that technologies are going to sit on the shelf or not get developed at all in the first instance.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It sort of is a misread of what the Bayh-Dole Act actually allows and what it was intended to do. It really is supposed to be this kind of break glass in case of emergency, the airbag of, yes, there are probably some scenarios very small and emergency style, where a company is, sitting on IP and intentionally not developing it to raise the price of one of the other products or something that sort of is in like the nefarious category. And then so, yes, it's on the government to step in and say, look, we funded this research. You aren't bringing it to people. Of course, that's an appropriate opportunity to march in. But that is not what's being contemplated in this RFI. This is very subjective, very unclear, and very difficult for companies to plan around because they don't know when the government is going to try to march in, because it isn't this clear only break glass in case of emergency. It's this set of potential scenarios, and is this factor considered, and what about this other factor? That's really difficult to anticipate. And so instead of waiting till the end and kind of hoping you don't get the rug pulled out from under you, you're just not going to play the game in the first place. And so it really would have, as you said, Andre, the opposite effect of what's described as the intent, which is to bring more technologies to the public. It actually would have the intent of having less.
Okay, let's thank you all. Let's go to questions, and we'll start here in the front row. Then we'll go back there, and if you can start with your name and who you work with.
I'm Arthur Allen from KFS Health. And I wanted to clarify some things that I just don't understand about this. You said that Dr. or Dave, that 100% of marching petitions in the past were rejected. Well, so a couple of questions related to that. Was there a framework of any kind in the past for march-in, or was it just referring to the original legislation? And could anyone file a march-in petition in the past, or under the current framework? And I guess following that, since the government turned all of them down, why does the existence of this framework automatically send fear through everyone that the government is going to, that there's